She stood at the altar alone, not because she was abandoned, but because she refused to beg. Then a man no one dared cross stepped forward and said 4 words that changed everything. I will marry her instead. Not out of love. Not out of pity. Out of something far more dangerous, principle. This is a story about 2 people who built something real from the wreckage of something fake. No fairy tales. No soft heroes. Just raw power, quiet tension, and a love neither of them saw coming. Subscribe, like, and comment. This story will consume you. The silence in the cathedral was not the reverent kind. It was the hell-breath kind, the kind that fills a room when everyone is watching someone bleed and no one wants to be the first to look away. Emily Chen stood 3 steps from the altar, her bouquet still in her hand, her spine still straight, and her face composed in a way that made at least 4 women in the front pew deeply uncomfortable. Because composure like that, in a moment like this, was not grace. It was armor. The kind you forge quietly over years when the world has taught you that falling apart in public only gives other people permission to look away. Richard Hale had already turned his back. He was walking toward the side door of the cathedral, jacket unbuttoned, one hand raised in a gesture that was half wave, half dismissal, as though he were leaving a dinner party that had run slightly too long. His best man followed. 2 groomsmen peeled off after that. The exodus was quiet, almost choreographed, as if Richard had rehearsed even this exit beforehand. And knowing Richard, he probably had. Emily watched him go. She did not call his name. She did not move toward him. She did not cry. She simply stood there, holding white peonies, and let the moment finish itself the way you let a storm pass, without chasing it, without fighting it, without pretending it was not happening. The officiant, a woman named Dr. Sarah Patel, who had known Emily since their undergraduate days at Berkeley, opened her mouth, closed it, and then looked out at the congregation as if hoping someone, anyone, would tell her what to do next. No one did. It was in that silence, that awful, sprawling, 5-second silence that felt like an entire season compressed into a single breath, that Jiho Kong spoke. He was not standing at the altar. He was seated in the 3rd row on the groom's side, which was unusual in itself, because Jiho Kang did not attend weddings. He did not attend social functions unless they served a specific, calculated purpose. He had been there because Richard Hale owed him something significant, something that Jiho had wanted witnessed in a public setting, and Jiho had come to watch Richard perform the role of devoted fiancé in front of 200 guests. He had wanted the public record. He had wanted the contrast between the man Richard showed the world and the man Richard actually was. Now Richard had just handed him that contrast on a silver platter. Jiho stood. He did not stand quickly. He did not stand with drama or urgency or any of the theatrical energy that the moment might have invited. He simply unfolded himself from the pew with the kind of slow, deliberate motion that made the people sitting near him instinctively shift their weight away, not because he was threatening them physically, but because his stillness carried a gravity that made proximity feel like an imposition. Like standing too close to something ancient and immovable. He walked toward the altar. Not toward Emily. Toward the space where the ceremony was supposed to happen. Toward Dr. Patel. Toward the microphone that was still live and broadcasting to the small live stream Richard had insisted on setting up for family members who could not attend. Every eye in the cathedral followed him. Jiho stopped at the foot of the altar steps. He did not look at Emily first. He looked at the congregation, scanning faces with the calm, systematic attention of a man who had spent decades reading rooms, and then he turned to Dr. Patel. His voice was calm. It was not loud. It did not need to be. In a room that's silent, a whisper would have carried to the back pews. I will marry her instead. For words. Delivered without inflection, without performance, without a single unnecessary syllable. As if he were reading a line item from a financial report. As if the weight of what he had just said was something he had already absorbed privately, long before he opened his mouth. The cathedral did not erupt. It did not fill with gasps or romantic murmurs or the joyful chaos that movies promise for moments like this. What happened was something far more telling. What happened was that 200 people went completely, utterly still. As if someone had pressed pause on the entire room. as if the air itself had been told to stop moving until it understood what had just been said. Jiho Kang was not a stranger in this cathedral. He was not unknown. He was precisely, specifically known, and that knowledge, the weight of it, the implications buried inside it, was the reason no one spoke. No one laughed. No one whispered to the person beside them. They simply sat and breathed and waited. Emily looked at him for the first time since he had stood up. Not with surprise. Not with hope or relief or any of the emotions the moment was supposed to produce. She looked at him with assessment. She was reading him the way she had been trained to read contracts during her years in corporate litigation, looking for the clause that would cost her something, the sentence buried in fine print that would bind her to something she had not consciously agreed to. She found nothing. His face was a closed door. Polished, sealed, revealing nothing about what was on the other side. "Who are you?" Dr. Patel asked. The question was almost reflexive, a professional obligation from a woman who was rapidly recalculating every assumption she had made about this afternoon. "Jiho Kang," he said. Simply, as if the name were self-explanatory. For most people in that room, it was. Dr. Patel looked at Emily. Emily looked at Jiho. The silence stretched again, but this time it carried a different texture. This time it was not the silence of shock or embarrassment. It was the silence of a woman deciding something important. Weighing options. Measuring outcomes. Choosing. Emily set the bouquet down on the altar ledge. Carefully. Deliberately. The way you set down a document after signing it, with finality, with intention, with the quiet acknowledgement that something has just ended. "Not here," she said. Her voice did not waver. It did not carry emotion. It carried authority. And she walked down the aisle, not toward Jiho, not toward the exit Richard had used, but down the center, past every face that had watched her almost marry the wrong man. Past every pair of eyes that had been expecting tears or collapse or some performance of devastation. She walked past all of it with her back straight and her chin level and her steps even, and she walked out the cathedral doors into the California afternoon without looking back at a single person in that room. Jiho watched her go. Then he straightened his jacket, nodded once to Dr. Patel as if thanking her for concluding a business meeting, and followed Emily out into the fog. They did not speak in the car. Jiho's driver, a man named Lawrence who had worked for him for 11 years and had learned, through experience, not to ask questions about the people who appeared in the back seat, pulled the black sedan to the curb outside the cathedral and opened the rear door without a word. Jiho gestured toward it. Emily hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to register the choice she was making, short enough that no one watching would have noticed, and then she got in. Jiho got in on the other side. The partition between the front and back seats was already up. San Francisco moved past the windows in gray streaks. The fog was rolling in off the bay, thick and relentless, swallowing the tops of buildings and turning the city into something muffled and indistinct. Emily watched it without seeing it. She was thinking. She was thinking fast, and she was thinking carefully, turning the last 10 minutes over in her mind the way a mechanic turns over an engine, looking for what was broken, what was running, what needed to be replaced. It was Emily who broke the silence. Not because she felt compelled to fill it. Because she had finished her initial calculation and needed data. "Explain it to me," she said. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the city sliding past. Not the performance back there. The actual reason. Jiho turned his head slightly. Not toward her, toward the window on his side. As if he were considering how much information to release and how much to withhold. "Richard Hale violated an agreement," he said. "What kind of agreement?" "A financial one. Involving assets I control. And marrying me is related to that. How exactly?" Jiho was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, it was with the same flat, measured precision he had used in the cathedral, as if emotion were a luxury he could not afford and had long since stopped carrying. "Richard's public humiliation of you creates a narrative. A specific one. If I marry you, I redirect that narrative entirely. It becomes about me, about my involvement, my authority, and Richard loses the ability to position himself as the wronged party. The story changes. And in the world Richard operates in, The story is everything. Emily let that sit. She turned it over in her mind, examined it from multiple angles, looked for the manipulation buried inside the logic. She was good at this. She had spent 8 years in corporate law before leaving the firm, and she had spent 3 of those years specifically learning how powerful men package their self-interest as something noble. She knew the shape of it. She knew the language. "So this is about Richard," she said. A statement, not a question. "Partly. What's the other part?" Jiho finally looked at her. His expression had not changed. It was still controlled, still carefully arranged, but something in his eyes shifted. Not warmth. Something more like acknowledgement. Like a man seeing something he had not expected to see and deciding it deserved his attention. "You walked away from that altar without breaking," he said. "That is not something I see often. I wanted to make sure it was not wasted." Emily turned her head and looked at him directly. The car moved through an intersection. A streetlight flickered on, casting orange light across the interior for a brief second before the darkness returned. "That's not an answer," she said. "No," Jiho agreed. And he did not elaborate. They met again 2 days later. The meeting took place in a conference room on the 42nd floor of a building in San Francisco's financial district, a building Emily had walked past dozens of times in her life without ever wondering what happened inside it. The lobby had no signage. The elevator required a keycard. The conference room itself was so aggressively neutral that it felt almost hostile in its blankness. A long white table, 6 chairs, water in clear glass pitchers, and nothing else. No art, no personal objects, no indication that human beings had ever used this space for anything other than transactions. Jiho was already seated when Emily arrived. He was alone. No lawyers flanking him, no assistants hovering nearby, no entourage signaling his importance through sheer proximity. Just Jiho, in a dark suit, hands resting on the table, waiting. Emily sat across from him. She had dressed with intention, not to impress, but to signal. A charcoal blazer over a black turtleneck, dark slacks, her hair pulled back from her face in a way that left nothing to hide behind. She was here to negotiate. She wanted that to be immediately, unmistakably clear. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to know exactly what you're proposing. Not the summary you gave me in the car. The complete version. Every condition. Every expectation. Everything." Jiho nodded once. He did not open a folder. He did not reference notes or pull up a presentation on a screen. He simply spoke, as if he had been rehearsing this conversation internally for 2 days, shaping each sentence until it was precise enough to carry the weight he needed it to carry. A legal marriage. Civil, not ceremonial. No public spectacle, no guest list, no performance. The marriage would be real in every binding legal sense, not a simulation, not an arrangement that exists only on paper while something else happens behind closed doors. It would be a genuine marriage. Duration? Open-ended. Either of us can revisit the terms at any point. There is no locked timeline. Conditions on my behavior? None. You keep your name. Separate residences or separate spaces within a shared residence, that choice is entirely yours. Financial transparency on both sides, mutual and equal. No decisions made on your behalf without your explicit, informed consent. And a prenuptial agreement drafted by your own attorney. Not mine. Someone you choose, someone you trust, someone who answers only to you. Emily listened. She did not write anything down. She listened the way she had listened during depositions in her former career, tracking not just the content of what was being said, but the rhythm of it. The pauses. The word choices. The places where a man chose one phrasing over another, and what that choice revealed about what he was actually thinking. "And what do you get out of it?" she asked. Richard loses his narrative. The public perception of him shifts. His business relationships, several of which depend entirely on his reputation as a trustworthy partner, begin to erode. Quietly. Organically. Without me having to do anything dramatic. "You want to destroy him." Jiho tilted his head. A small movement. Almost imperceptible, but Emily caught it. "I want to correct an imbalance," he said. Richard made a public statement by ending that wedding. He stood in front of 200 people and chose to humiliate you in order to protect his own comfort. I am making a public statement in response. The story changes. And when the story changes, Richard's position changes with it, using me as the instrument of that change. With you, Jiho said. And the distinction, the careful, deliberate emphasis on with rather than using landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripple was small, but it was there. Emily held his gaze. She did not look away. She was searching for the hidden cost, the buried clause, the fine print that would reveal what this arrangement would actually require of her once the initial terms wore thin and the reality of daily life set in. She did not find it. That did not mean it was not there. It meant he was skilled enough to conceal it or principled enough not to need one. I'll need time to think, she said. Take as long as you need, Jiho said. A week. 2 weeks. There is no deadline. Emily stood. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair, and as she turned toward the door, something stopped her. Not a physical force, an internal one. A question she had been carrying since the cathedral, one she had been deliberately setting aside because she had not yet decided whether she wanted the answer. She asked it anyway. Why did you do it publicly? She said, without turning around. In the cathedral. Why not deal with Richard privately? You clearly have the means. Why make it a spectacle? The room was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Emily almost turned back around, almost decided he was not going to answer. Then Jiho spoke. Because Richard did it in front of people, he said. And the things that are done in front of people have to be answered in front of people. Otherwise, the people watching learn the wrong lesson. Emily turned her head slightly, just enough to show she had heard him. Just enough to acknowledge that the answer had landed somewhere it was supposed to land. Then she walked out of the conference room, took the elevator down 42 floors, and stepped back into the fog-wrapped city, and spent the next 5 days turning everything he had said over and over in her mind like a stone she was polishing. She called him on the 5th day. Not to accept. Not yet. To ask one final question, the one that mattered more than all the others combined. If I say no, she said, without preamble, without greeting, what happens to me? Specifically. Concretely. What are the consequences? Jiho did not hesitate. His answer came immediately, as if he had anticipated this question, and had already prepared the answer weeks in advance. Nothing. You walk away. You owe me nothing, no money, no obligation, no loyalty, no silence. I deal with Richard through other channels. Your life continues exactly as it would have if I had never spoken in that cathedral. I will not contact you again unless you initiate it. And if I say yes and then later I change my mind? After the marriage is legal. After it has already begun. Same answer. The exit is always open. I will not close it. I will not guilt you into staying. I will not make leaving difficult or costly or emotionally complicated. If you want out, you say so, and you are out. Emily was standing on the roof of her apartment building in the Mission District. It was evening. The fog had come in thick again, the kind that turned the city into a gray, muffled cocoon, swallowing the skyline and muting every sound until the world felt smaller than it actually was. She could hear the distant hum of traffic below, but it sounded far away. Underwater, almost. She had been standing up here for 20 minutes before she made the call. She had been watching the fog erase the buildings one by one, and she had been thinking about what it meant to make a choice when every available option carried risk. When safety was not actually available. When the only real question was not, is this dangerous, but what kind of dangerous can I live with? Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, I'll marry you. Jiho did not say thank you. He did not say anything romantic or emotionally significant or designed to make the moment feel larger than it was. He said, I will have the paperwork drafted by tomorrow morning. Your attorney can have it for review by end of business. Jiho. Yes. I need you to understand something clearly before this goes any further. This is not gratitude. This is not rescue. This is not me falling into something because I don't have another option. This is strategy. Deliberate, informed, eyes-open strategy. I am choosing this because it serves my interests, not because yours do. A pause. Brief. The kind of pause that suggested he had heard something he had not expected to hear and was recalibrating his understanding of who he was talking to. "I know," he said. "That is precisely why I asked." They married on a Tuesday. A civil ceremony in a small, fluorescent-lit office on the third floor of San Francisco City Hall. Just the two of them, a clerk named Margaret who had processed roughly 10,000 marriages over her career and had developed, through sheer repetition, a kind of quiet reverence for the act regardless of its context, and Jiho's attorney, a thin, silent man named David Chin who stood near the door and said nothing throughout the entire proceeding. Emily wore a navy dress she had purchased that same morning at a department store on Union Square. Not because she did not own beautiful clothes. Because she did not want to wear anything that Richard had ever seen her in. She did not want a single thread of this day to carry the fingerprint of the previous chapter. Jiho wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, his collar open one button lower than it had been in the cathedral. His hands were in his pockets during the ceremony, and Emily noticed, because she noticed everything, it was both her greatest professional asset and her most exhausting personal trait, that his posture was different than it had been 2 weeks earlier. Looser. Less curated. As if, without an audience of 200 people watching him perform, he could afford to be something closer to himself. Margaret read the vows. Standard municipal language. Nothing personalized, nothing poetic, nothing that would make someone cry or smile or feel the weight of what was happening. Emily said, "I do," with the same measured tone she used when she signed a lease agreement, firm, considered, final. Jiho said, "I do," and looked at her when he said it, and Emily caught something in his expression that she could not immediately categorize. It was not love. It was not even warmth, exactly. It was something closer to recognition. As if he were seeing her, truly seeing her, not the version of her that Richard had presented to the world, but the actual woman standing in front of him for the first time. And finding that the view was more interesting, more complicated, more worthy of his attention than he had initially assumed. They did not kiss. Margaret did not suggest it. The ceremony concluded, they signed the marriage license. Emily's handwriting steady and precise, Jiho's surprisingly small and controlled, and they walked out of City Hall into the San Francisco afternoon, and for a moment they simply stood on the sidewalk. Two people who were now legally married, and the absurdity of it hung between them like something visible. "Lunch?" Jiho asked. Emily almost laughed. It did not come out as a full laugh, it came out as a small exhale through her nose, quiet and involuntary, something that might have been amusement or might have been the release of tension she had been holding for 2 weeks. "Sure," she said. Lunch. They ate at a small Japanese restaurant in Japantown that Jiho clearly frequented. The chef knew his order. The table was already set. The tea was already poured. They talked about nothing consequential. The weather. A building under construction near the restaurant that was making the neighborhood louder than usual. A book Emily had been reading. Jiho did not ask personal questions. Emily did not volunteer personal information. They simply occupied the same space, ate the same meal, and existed in a silence that was not uncomfortable. It was, Emily thought, the most honest meal she had eaten in years. The first week inside the marriage was strange in the way that all new arrangements are strange, not because anything was wrong, but because everything was unfamiliar. And the body does not distinguish between discomfort caused by danger and discomfort caused by novelty. Jiho had arranged a residence for them in Pacific Heights, a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the bay and enough square footage that 2 people could inhabit it for months without ever accidentally brushing against each other in a hallway. Emily had her own bedroom, large, well-furnished, with its own bathroom and a window that caught the morning light before the fog burned through. Her own study, smaller, with a desk and bookshelves and a door that closed and locked from the inside. Jiho's spaces were on the opposite end of the apartment. The distance between them was not hostile. It was respectful. It was the physical architecture of a boundary that had been agreed upon. Emily spent the first 3 days exploring, not the apartment itself, which was straightforward enough, but the documents. The prenuptial agreement had arrived on her desk the morning after the ceremony, delivered by a courier in a plain envelope, and it was 62 pages long. She read every word. Twice. Then she called Rachel Torres. Rachel was a family law attorney Emily had known for 6 years, sharp, direct, slightly cynical in the way that all good lawyers eventually become, and fiercely loyal to the handful of clients she actually liked. Emily was one of them. "I need you to review something," Emily said, without introduction. "And I need you to be brutal about it." She sent the prenuptial agreement electronically. Rachel called back 40 minutes later. "Emily." "What?" "This is unusually generous." "To you." "I know. The financial independence clauses alone, these are not standard. This is not a man trying to protect his assets. This is a man trying to give you every possible exit ramp while keeping the marriage intact." "I know that too." Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried something that might have been concern, or might have been professional curiosity. "So what are you worried about?" Emily looked out the window of her study. The fog was doing its nightly work, erasing the horizon line inch by inch, turning the bay into a featureless gray expanse. "I'm worried about what I can't see yet," she said. "The things that aren't in the document. The things that exist in the spaces between the clauses." "Do you want me to dig?" "Not yet. Let me watch first." She watched. And on the 9th day, she saw it. Not through confession. Not through a dramatic revelation or a document left carelessly on a desk. She saw it the way she saw most things, through accumulation. Through the slow, patient collection of small details that, taken individually, meant nothing, but arranged together, formed a picture that was impossible to ignore. She saw it in the way Jiho's phone calls ended at precisely the same time every evening, not because the conversations concluded naturally, but because Jiho ended them. Deliberately. As if he had decided, before the call began, exactly how long it would last, and he enforced that limit with the same discipline he enforced everything else. She saw it in the men who came to the apartment. Not to the front door, to the service entrance, the one that opened onto the alley behind the building. They came in, stayed for 10 minutes, sometimes 15, and left. Jiho met them in the kitchen or the small room off the hallway that Emily had assumed was storage, but which turned out to contain a desk, a secure phone, and nothing else. She never heard what was said. She did not need to. The pattern told her enough. She saw it in the way Lawrence drove. Not always directly. Sometimes the route from the apartment to wherever they were going took a detour, a left turn that should have been a right, a block added that served no geographic purpose. Jiho never commented on it. Emily learned, after several days of watching, that the detours were not random. They were deliberate. They were the kind of route adjustments that people make when they are being followed, or when they want to be absolutely certain that no one knows exactly where they are going. She saw it in the way Jiho held power. Not loudly, not visibly, not in the way that wealth usually announces itself, through possessions, through displays, through the performance of influence. Jiho's power was structural. It existed in the infrastructure of things, in phone calls that ended conversations before they began, in rooms that no one else entered, in the way certain people, when they heard his name, did not react with admiration or curiosity, but with a careful, measured stillness. The same stillness the cathedral had gone quiet with. It was gravity. Invisible. Constant. Impossible to escape once you understood it was there. She confronted him on a Thursday evening. They were in the kitchen, one of the few spaces in the apartment where their paths naturally crossed, because both of them needed coffee at roughly the same time each evening. Jiho was at the counter, pouring water into the reservoir of an expensive machine with the kind of unconscious precision that suggested he had done this exact motion thousands of times. Emily was at the island counter across from him, a legal brief open in front of her. She had begun consulting for a non-profit organization that helped women navigate institutional power structures, and the work was absorbing in a way that felt necessary and clarifying. She set down her pen. She looked at him. "Tell me about your business," she said. Jiho did not look up from the coffee machine. He continued pouring water with steady hands. "Which part?" he asked. "The part you don't put on business cards." The coffee machine began its slow, mechanical hiss. Jiho turned and leaned against the counter, facing her. His expression was exactly what it always was: controlled, arranged, carefully neutral. But he did not deny it. He did not redirect or deflect or pretend he did not understand what she was asking. He simply waited, as if giving her time to decide how much honesty she could absorb. "I manage systems," he said, after a silence that lasted long enough to feel deliberate. "Financial systems. Power structures. The kind of infrastructure that holds cities together or, depending on who is operating it, tears them apart." "That's vague." "Yes. I need it to be less vague, Jiho. I need actual information, not metaphors." Jiho regarded her. The coffee machine clicked off. The kitchen went quiet, the kind of quiet that kitchens go when the appliances stop and the only sound is two people breathing in the same room. "I am not a good man, Emily," he said. It was not self-pity. It was not a confession designed to provoke sympathy or to create a moment of emotional intimacy. It was information, delivered with the same flat neutrality he used for everything, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. The facts, stated clearly, without decoration. "I have done things that would disturb you," he continued. "I will probably do things in the future that would disturb you. I did not marry you to hide that from you. I did not marry you to create an illusion of normalcy around something that is not normal. I married you because, within the scope of what I do, within the world I operate in, you represent something I am not willing to let Richard Hale damage or diminish." "And what is that?" Jiho looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had looked at her in City Hall, with that quality of recognition, that sense of seeing something clearly. "Proof," he said, "that not everything in my world is transactional." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a siren passed, distant, moving away, fading into the fog until it was gone entirely. Emily held his gaze for a long time. She was not searching for the lie anymore. She had been doing that for 9 days, and she had not found one, not because she was certain he would never lie to her, but because the lies she had been looking for, the kind that men like Richard told, the kind that were designed to keep women passive and grateful, were simply not present. Jiho was not trying to make her feel safe. He was not trying to make her feel grateful. He was trying to make her feel informed. And that, she realized, was the most radical thing anyone had ever done for her. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Jiho nodded. He poured her a cup of coffee. She took it. And they stood in the kitchen, on opposite sides of the counter, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of things they had both seen, both acknowledged, both decided to carry forward into the same life without pretending they were not there. Richard Hale's collapse did not happen in a single dramatic moment. There was no confrontation scene, no explosive boardroom revelation, no speech delivered across a conference table that reduced a man to rubble. Power, real power, the quiet, structural kind that Jiho wielded, did not operate through spectacle. It operated through withdrawal. Through the slow, steady removal of support, the way a river erodes a bank, not all at once, but persistently, inevitably, until the ground can no longer hold what it once held. Emily watched it unfold over the course of 6 weeks, and she watched it with a clarity that surprised her. First, 2 of Richard's most significant business partners quietly renegotiated their contracts. The changes were small on paper, a clause here, a provision there, but they stripped Richard of leverage he had relied on for years. Emily did not know whether Jiho had orchestrated this directly or whether it had happened as a natural consequence of the narrative shift. The story had changed. Richard was no longer the man who had walked away from a wedding with dignity intact. He was the man who had been replaced publicly, unmistakably, by someone whose influence Richard could not match or counter. In the world Richard inhabited, that distinction was not embarrassing. It was existential. Then came the financial exposure. A journalist at the Chronicle ran a piece on a real estate development that had gone sideways, a project Richard had been involved in peripherally. His name attached to it through a series of holding companies that were difficult to trace, but not impossible to find if you were looking. The article was not devastating on its own. But it was the kind of story that made other journalists curious, and within 2 weeks there were 3 more pieces, each one slightly sharper, each one pulling at a thread that Richard had spent years keeping carefully tucked away from public view. Emily read every article. She did not feel satisfaction. She did not feel vindication or triumph or any of the emotions that revenge narratives promised. She felt something more complicated, a kind of grim, clear-eyed understanding. Richard Hale had not been destroyed by Jiho. He had been seen. Clearly, publicly, without the protective buffer of reputation that he had spent decades constructing. And the world, having seen him clearly, had simply decided that what it saw did not merit the trust it had previously extended. Power rarely screams. It withdraws. And once it withdraws, it does not come back. She told Jiho what she was thinking one evening while they were both working in the living room, him on his laptop at one end of the sofa, her on a legal brief at the other end, the space between them comfortable and unhurried. "He's not going to recover from this," she said, without looking up from her document. Jiho glanced at her. "No. Did you plan all of it? Every piece?" A pause. Honest. The kind of pause that Jiho used when he was choosing not to shade the truth. Some of it. The initial moves, yes. The rest followed its own momentum. Once the story shifted, the consequences were almost automatic. "I did not have to direct every step. Does that bother you? That some of it happened without your control." Jiho considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything, with attention and without rushing. "No," he said. "Richard understood the world he was operating in when he chose to violate our agreement. The consequences are proportional to the violation. I did not create the system. I simply stopped protecting him from it." Emily nodded slowly. She set down her pen and looked at the ceiling for a moment, turning the moral weight of what he had said over in her mind. She was not horrified. And the fact that she was not horrified, the fact that she could sit in this room, in this marriage, with this man, and feel something closer to understanding than revulsion, told her something about herself that she was not entirely comfortable with. She was disturbed, yes. She understood clearly that Jiho's definition of proportional was not the definition that most people would recognize or accept. But she also understood, because she had spent enough years inside the machinery of institutional power to know how it actually functioned, that Richard Hale had never been an innocent man caught in someone else's game. He had been a player. He had simply been protected, for a long time, by a reputation that he had not earned and did not deserve. "I'm not going to pretend this is justice," Emily said quietly. "I'm not asking you to," Jiho replied. And the honesty in it, the complete absence of self-righteousness, the simple acknowledgement that what he did existed outside the boundaries of conventional morality and that he had no intention of pretending otherwise, landed between them with a weight that felt, paradoxically, like trust. The intimacy did not arrive with a kiss or a confession or a night where one of them finally shattered the other's defenses and everything that had been held back came flooding through. It did not arrive in a single moment. It arrived the way seasons arrive, gradually, almost imperceptibly, in accumulations so small that neither of them could have identified the exact day when the arrangement had become something else. It arrived when Jiho, coming home late one night after a phone call that had lasted longer than usual, found Emily asleep on the living room couch with a legal document still loosely held in her hand. He did not wake her. He did not move her. He simply walked to the hallway closet, retrieved a blanket, a thick, gray cashmere one that Emily had not seen before, and laid it over her with a care that was precise and unhurried, the way you cover something you value. He tucked the edges around her shoulders. Then he went to his bedroom and closed the door. Emily woke up the next morning with the blanket around her and the document on the floor and a feeling in her chest that she spent 20 minutes trying to name before she gave up and simply carried it with her through the day. She did not mention it to Jiho. He did not mention it either. But something had shifted, some invisible calibration had adjusted, and they both felt it without needing to articulate it. It arrived when they started eating dinner together 3 nights a week. Not by formal agreement, by habit. They were both hungry at roughly the same time, and the kitchen was large enough that cooking for 2 required only marginally more effort than cooking for 1, and at some point the pattern simply established itself. They talked during these dinners, not about anything consequential at first, not about the marriage or Jiho's world or Richard or any of the heavy machinery that had brought them together. They talked about the city, about food, about small observations, the way the fog moved differently on different days, the way certain neighborhoods changed personality after midnight, the way a good cup of coffee could alter the texture of an entire morning. And then, one evening in late March, over soba noodles and green tea, Jiho told her about his childhood. Not everything. Not the full story. Emily understood, by now, that Jiho's relationship with full disclosure was carefully managed, and she did not push for more than he offered. But he told her enough. He told her about Seoul in winter. About his father, who had been a businessman of moderate success and enormous emotional distance, a man who communicated primarily through silence and expectation. About the way Jiho had learned, very early, that power was not something you were given, but something you constructed, piece by piece, from whatever materials were available to you. He told her it had cost him things he could not name, things that other people carried easily, things that came naturally to most humans, but that Jiho had traded away, consciously or not, in exchange for the ability to operate in the world the way he operated. Emily listened. She listened the way she always listened, with precision and full attention, without interrupting, without offering unsolicited comfort or sympathy. When he finished, she did not say "I'm sorry" or "that must have been hard" or any of the reflexive things that people say when someone shares something painful. She said, "Thank you for telling me." And Jiho looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time in the months she had known him, completely unguarded. Not soft. Not vulnerable in the way that movies portray vulnerability, but open. As if a door that had been closed for a very long time had been opened, just slightly, just enough to let light through, and he was surprised to find that the light did not burn. The confrontation Emily had been quietly preparing for arrived on a Wednesday evening in early April. She had spent 2 weeks gathering information, not through illegal means, not through hacking or surveillance, or any of the dramatic methods that stories like this usually employed. She gathered it the way she had been trained to gather it, in law school and in the corporate firms she had worked in afterward, through observation, through public records, through conversations with people who were willing to talk, and through the careful reading of financial documents that Jiho, true to the terms of their agreement, had made available to her. She understood the shape of it now. Not every detail. Jiho's world was vast and layered and deliberately obscured in places, but enough. Enough to know what she was living inside. Enough to make an informed decision about whether she wanted to stay. She sat him down in his study, the room she had entered only once before, the one with the secure phone and the locked desk and the view of the bay that turned black at night. She had closed the door behind her. She had not turned on the overhead light, only the desk lamp, which cast a small circle of warm light in the otherwise dark room. Jiho was in his chair. Emily was standing, not because she wanted to tower over him, but because standing felt more honest for what she was about to say. She needed to be on her feet. She needed the ground under her. "I know what you do," she said. Simply. Without accusation, without drama, without the emotional freight that a statement like that usually carried. Jiho did not move. He did not flinch or tighten or show any external sign that the words had landed. But Emily had spent enough time watching him to know that his stillness was not absence of feeling. It was control of feeling. And the fact that his control was holding this tightly told her that the words had landed exactly where she intended them to. "How much?" he asked. "Enough." A pause. Jiho nodded once, a small, slow movement that acknowledged both the information and the way she had chosen to deliver it. "And," he said, "one word. Not defensive. Not evasive. Simply asking what came next." Emily looked at him for a long time. The desk lamp flickered slightly, a small electrical tremor that made the shadows in the room shift and settle. "I have 2 questions," she said. "And I need you to answer them honestly. Not strategically. Not with the version of the truth that protects you or makes you look better than you are. Honestly. Ask. First, did you ever intend to tell me? On your own, without me having to find it?" Jiho considered this. He did not answer immediately. He thought about it, genuinely, visibly thought about it, turning the question over the way Emily turned over contracts. "Yes," he said. "Eventually." When I believed you had enough context to understand it without being frightened by it. And, second, do you regret any of it? Not the marriage. Not the way you handled Richard. The rest of it. The things you have done, the systems you have built, the world you operate in. Do you regret being the person who does those things? This question took longer. Jiho was quiet for nearly a full minute. Emily did not rush him. She stood in the lamplight and waited, and the room was so quiet that she could hear the buildings settling around them, the small, structural sounds that old buildings make at night. No, Jiho said, finally. I do not regret it. I believe the systems I maintain serve a purpose. I believe that order, even imperfect order, even order that operates outside the boundaries that most people consider acceptable, is preferable to the chaos that exists when no one is willing to maintain it. I am not a moral man, Emily. I have never pretended to be one. But I am a necessary one. And I have made my peace with the difference. Emily absorbed this. She did not argue with it. She did not tell him he was wrong, or that his logic was flawed, or that the world did not actually need men like him. She understood, because she had spent enough time watching how power actually functioned, as opposed to how it was supposed to function, that his assessment was not entirely inaccurate. The systems he described were real. The chaos that would exist without someone willing to maintain them was real. The moral cost of that maintenance was also real. All of it was true at the same time. And living with that kind of complexity, holding multiple truths that contradicted each other without collapsing into denial or simplification, was, Emily had come to understand, one of the hardest things a person could do. Okay, she said. Jiho looked at her. Okay, what? Okay. I'm not leaving. Something moved in Jiho's expression. Not relief. He was too disciplined for something that obvious. Something quieter. Something that looked, if Emily were being precise about it, like the first small crack in a wall that had been holding for a very long time. You don't have to stay, he said. I want to be clear about that. The offer I made, the exit, it is still real. It has always been real. If this is not something you can live with. Jiho. Emily stepped closer. Not close enough to touch him. Close enough that the distance between them felt deliberate rather than default. I am not staying because I have nowhere else to go. I am not staying because I am afraid or grateful or trapped. I am staying because I have looked at this, all of it, the parts that are clean and the parts that are not, and I have decided that this is where I want to be. On my terms. With my eyes open. She paused. Then she said the thing she had been carrying for weeks, the thing that had been forming in her chest like a conviction solidifying from liquid to stone. You gave me a choice, she said. A real one. Not a performance of a choice, not a choice with hidden consequences designed to make one option more attractive than the others. A genuine choice, with a genuine exit. And I have never, in my entire life, been given that by anyone. So yes, I am staying. Not because you're a good man. Because you treated me like one. The room was very still. The lamplight flickered again, and the shadows moved, and Jiho looked at Emily the way he had looked at her in City Hall, with that quality of recognition, that sense of seeing someone clearly and finding the view worth the attention it demanded. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The silence held everything. The renegotiation happened the following week. Emily drafted the new terms herself, not with Rachel's help, though Rachel reviewed them afterward and pronounced them thorough and fair, which is remarkable given the circumstances. Emily wrote them alone, in her study, over the course of 3 days, and when she was finished, she brought the document to Jiho and set it on his desk and sat across from him and read each clause aloud while he listened. Equal decision-making authority on any matter that involved her name, her image, or her public presence. Financial independence, not just the ability to spend, but the ability to earn, invest, and build wealth through her own efforts, entirely separate from Jiho's financial ecosystem. The right to maintain her own professional identity, her own network, her own career trajectory, without Jiho's involvement or approval. And one final clause, the one that mattered most. If either of us decides, at any point in the future, that this marriage is no longer serving both of us, Emily read, the dissolution will be handled with mutual respect, full financial fairness, and complete anonymity. Neither party will use the marriage or its dissolution as leverage against the other. Ever. She looked up from the document. Ji-ho was watching her with an attention that was not casual, the kind of focus he brought to everything that mattered to him, which was not much, but which, when it included something, included it completely. Agreed, he said. Without hesitation. Without negotiation. Without a single modification. Emily set the document down. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had looked at him in his study the night she had confronted him, with the full weight of her attention and the full honesty of what she was feeling. You know, she said, most men would have pushed back on at least one of those clauses. I am not most men. No, Emily said. You're not. And something passed between them, not a kiss, not a declaration, not any of the dramatic gestures that stories like this usually required. Something quieter. An acknowledgement. A mutual recognition that they had built something unusual and difficult and real, and that they were both willing to keep building it. The final shift came in small increments, the way all genuine change comes not in a single revelation, but in the accumulation of ordinary moments that, taken together, constituted a life. Ji-ho began to change, not softening exactly, because softness was not a quality he had ever possessed or wanted. Reorienting. Recalibrating the compass by which he made decisions. He began to choose, in situations where the ruthless option and the measured option were both available, the measured one. Not every time. Not perfectly. But more often than before. As if Emily's presence in his life, not her influence exactly, but the fact of her, the reality of a person who saw him clearly and had chosen to remain, had shifted something in the way he understood what he was doing and why. Emily, for her part, began to build. The foundation she had been planning, the one focused on helping women navigate institutional power, took shape over the course of the spring. She raised the money herself. She recruited the board herself. She did not ask Ji-ho for a single dollar, and he did not offer one. What he offered instead was something subtler. He made certain that the people who might have tried to interfere with what she was building, the quiet, structural obstacles that powerful men place in the path of women who are building power of their own, simply did not materialize. Emily never knew whether this was deliberate or coincidental. She suspected the former. She did not ask. Some things she had learned did not need to be spoken aloud to be understood. One night in late April, a Sunday, the fog thick and the apartment warm and the city invisible beyond the windows, they were sitting in the living room after dinner. Not talking, not working, simply existing in the same space, each of them reading, the silence between them comfortable and inhabited in a way that silence between strangers never is. Ji-ho set down his book. He looked at Emily, at the way the lamplight fell across the page she was reading, at the way her fingers held the book with the same precise grip she brought to everything, at the way she had tucked her feet beneath her on the sofa in a posture that was, for once, completely unguarded. I think I owe you an apology, he said. Emily looked up. For what? For the cathedral. For the way I framed it, as strategy, as correction, as a move in a game. It was all of those things. But it was not only those things. And I was not honest about the rest of it. Not with you. Not with myself. Emily set her book down. She turned her body slightly, facing him more fully. She did not interrupt. She waited. When I stood up in that cathedral, Ji-ho said, and I looked at you standing there alone, with your bouquet, with your back straight, with your face showing nothing, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Something I did not have a name for, and that frightened me, because I do not like things I cannot name or control. He paused. The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that happens late at night in apartments high above the city, when the world below has gone silent, and the only sounds are the ones you make yourself. What I felt, Ji-ho said, was that I could not let that moment end the way it was ending. Not because of Richard. Not because of the assets or the agreement or any of the transactional reasons I gave you afterward. Because you were standing there and you were whole, and the idea of the world seeing you as broken, as someone who had been discarded, was something I could not accept. I did not understand, at the time, why I could not accept it. I understand now. Emily held his gaze. The lamplight flickered. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like something patient and alive. "And what do you understand now?" she asked. Quietly. Jiho looked at her for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual, not quieter, but lower, as if the words were coming from somewhere deeper than the place where he usually kept them. "That you are the first person in my life who has made me want to be seen," he said. "Not feared. Not respected. Not useful. Seen." The room held the silence that followed. Emily did not fill it with words, not immediately. She let it exist, let it breathe, let it carry the weight of what had just been said without rushing to respond or to process or to make it mean something larger than it already was. Then she reached across the space between them on the sofa, not dramatically, not with urgency, but with the same deliberate, considered motion she brought to everything, and she took his hand. Jiho looked down at her hand around his. Something moved in his expression, a small, almost invisible shift, like the first crack in ice that has been solid for years. Not breaking, just beginning, very slowly, to thaw. They sat like that for a long time. Neither of them spoke. The fog continued its slow work outside the windows, erasing the city piece by piece, and inside the apartment the lamplight held steady, and two people who had begun as strangers, who had become partners through strategy and circumstance, who had become something more through honesty and time and the quiet, unglamorous work of choosing each other every single day, sat together in the warm, quiet dark and held on. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of every choice, the tension of every silence, the slow and honest build of something that refused to be anything other than real, then you already know what to do. Like this. Comment what moment in this story hit you the hardest. And subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be heard by everyone who has ever been told that love has to arrive loudly to matter. It doesn't. Sometimes it arrives like this. Quietly, deliberately, in the space between two people who finally decided to be brave enough to stay.